so many new pieces to this IU football team.
To me, that's going to set the tone on how you get ready for games on Saturday in the fall.
I would put that Indiana room up against anybody else in the conference, and that's something that we typically don't even come close to saying.
If you want to get total sickos committee about it, there's a position battle at long snapper too.
This is the Hoosier Huddle Podcast, part of the College Huddle Podcast Network.
Good afternoon and welcome back to the Hoosier Huddle Podcast. It has been a while since we've been on a podcast, and today we welcome in Matt Weaver from Peaks.com. But first, I want to give you guys a little site update. So we were at Rivals. We have moved on from Rivals and are back to being independent. We have a nice deal going on. For the year. $15 will get you the rest of the year. And, come. There's forums. We'll talk. And we'll see where it goes. So we welcome in T.J. Inman and Matt Weaver. T.J., let's start with you. How are you?
Doing great. Yeah, I know we're excited about the new site. A lot of work, but for those that aren't aware, we're back independent and really, really pumped up about what we have to offer. Definitely still a work in progress on the technological side, but we'll get there. And we are going to be covering basketball as well. So, but the bread and butter remains football, and that's what we're here to talk about today. So I'm excited.
Matt, how are you guys doing this summer? A lot of recruiting news and things like that. How's it going?
It's going okay. It's slowed down quite a bit. June was kind of the busy month into early July, but it's slowed down. I mean, they're what are they at 22, 23 commits, I believe. So I think they're if they're not done, they're really, really close to being done. So. But it's been a good recruiting cycle for IU. They've put together a really solid class.
So far, Indiana's sitting at 22 commits in this class. They're, depending who you look at, are right outside or right inside the top 25. Is it too early to look at rankings, especially since you had an On3 and Rivals merger and all those rankings kind of maybe skew the aggregate a little bit? But how invested should fans be in these rankings and being just outside the top 25?
Oh, I mean, I think they're fun to look at, obviously, and it's fun to see where you're at. But I mean, what is it today? July 15th. You're still, several months away from the early signing period, and these guys are just verbal commits. There's nothing binding right now, so it's fun. But the rankings will change. I mean, you can go from 30 to 25 with one commitment, or you can move back because a school, a couple schools or somebody gets a commitment. So they're all jumbled up. There's not a whole lot of difference between when you get in this range. So like I said, it's the biggest thing to look at for me is what does it look like 2 or 3 years down the road? How did these guys develop? Not every guy's going to hit. You're not going to hit on every guy. Some are just not going to pan out. That's the way it works. But can you hit on a good number of them? Can they be developed? And become foundational pieces for your team and your future teams over the next 2, 3, 4 years. So like I said, rankings are fun, but it's kind of like draft rankings for the NFL. Everybody gets ranked with a letter grade, but how does it look in 2 or 3 years? Did those guys improve your roster or not? So to me, it's kind of the same thing with these college rankings.
Yeah, and what stands out to me more than rankings whenever I'm looking at prospects, and I'm certainly not an expert talent evaluator, but when I'm looking at prospects, I look at what programs are after these guys. And you look at the offer lists, legitimate offers. Excitement can come in. A lot of these players, almost all of them, were guys that a lot of high major programs and really smart programs we're after. Teams that you would say Indiana is either competing directly against, a lot of Michigan State, you know, Wisconsin, schools like that, that are kind of in the middle of the Big Ten trying to punch up. Um, Illinois, another one that Indiana went head to head with some. And then some others that IU got from SEC schools, guys that SEC schools really wanted. So I think that's where the excitement factor comes in. Are there any particular recruits in this class that you might have been a little bit surprised that IU was able to reel in, just based on the history of Indiana football? Um, any guys that stand out as particularly surprising to you that they were able to add to this class so far?
Yeah, there's a couple. I mean, like right now, the top ranked guy in the class, if you go by the 247 ranking, Cavante Hugan, he had a number of offers. Gabriel Hill's another guy, that was a big get and had a lot of schools after him. And these are two positions, especially with Hill at D tackle, that it's tough to recruit to. Those guys are hard to find. Hugan's probably going to be more of a strong side DN. But those are tough to recruit to. Henry Ollinger's another one. He's a really good running back in Indiana, and some other schools like him as a linebacker. And he had some good schools. I mean, Iowa was after him as a running back, and that's a good place to go if you play running back. Obviously, they run the ball and they do a good job. Rodell Johnson, because he's a Missouri kid, and I heard it was down to IU in Missouri, and I'd actually heard from somebody close to the program that they thought they were a little bit behind Missouri. And then a few days later, it was Indiana. Now, one thing we have to remember, and I'm not saying this is why they got some. I mean, but we're now in a rev share, paying players staying. So sometimes, these maybe aren't as it's not traditional recruiting like it was in the past. Although obviously money might have been involved back then too, just illegally. But that plays a part too. There's some guys that maybe Indiana was in on, and they backed off at the last minute because the price got to a point where they weren't comfortable paying that much. And Cignetti is basically operating as a GM and a head coach. He's one he's got to figure out who he's going to pay, how much he's going to pay, and all that kind of stuff. And then he's the one that's going to say, no, we're going to walk away. It's just gotten a little bit too rich. But they've done a really good job. This is a good class. I think, they pretty much hit every position. They in the positions where they needed to get. I mean, they got 7. I think it's 7 defensive line commits. If you count Trevor Gibbs, which I think he's probably going to be an edge, but he could be a tight end. But if you count him as a D-line guy, they got 7 guys. I mean, Pat Kuntz and Buda Williams have done a phenomenal job. And all these coaches have, but those guys have really. And you go back to last year, they brought in a good class. The guys that are going to be freshmen this fall, they brought in some really good players. And even the year before that, Landino and Dukeway, I think those are 2 guys that are going to be they're going to be in the rotation this year at their respective positions. So those guys have done a great job, recruiting. But this whole staff does a really good job. I think the DB coaches have done really well, not only in high school recruiting but portal recruiting as well. So it's like I said, I think it's a quality class. But we'll see. Like time will tell. But this staff, and I think they've built on the success. If you can go out and put together another, really successful season, I think you'll see even, a higher level of recruiting when you get to the 27 class.
Speaking about NIL and all the nonsense that's going on with revenue sharing and court cases and lawyers getting $750 million, Matt, what is your feeling on where IU stands on being able to pay for players? I know Kirk Cignetti kind of thought it was a joke. Said that, since Darren DeVries had to get an entire new roster that, he had to scrounge around for a little bit more money. But where does IU stand, not only in the Big Ten, but nationally with their NIL efforts?
Well, I think they're pretty competitive. I mean, to say that they're on the same level as like an Ohio State, or I've seen numbers thrown around some schools like $30 million or whatever it is. I mean, I don't think they're at that level, but they're certainly at a level where you can bring in quality players from the portal, quality players from the high school ranks, and put together a roster that can compete, with some of not just your peers. I mean, TJ mentioned the recruiting battles over like a Wisconsin and Iowa and Illinois, Michigan State. Those are the teams that you really need to beat, fairly regularly. And then hopefully, maybe once in a while, going up against Ohio State, a Penn State, a Michigan's going to be tough. It always has been. It always will be. But, if you can maybe, sneak in there and win some battles, it's still an uphill climb, but that would be nice. But I think they're in a very competitive spot. Obviously, rev share is supposed to be the same. Although I saw, who was it? Was it Lane Kiffin said he thinks some people are outspending their rev share, or they're not staying within the limits that have been regulated. Yeah. I don't know if that's true. I have no idea. It wouldn't surprise me. I mean, there's basically no regulation right now in college football. So who's to say that people aren't doing that? I mean, it's the wild, wild west pretty much.
Yeah. I want to go to recruiting philosophy, Matt. Last year was very, very portal heavy as you rebuilt the roster. You kind of want to balance that out in terms of high school kids. Have they met that philosophy in your opinion, that they're starting to now, of course, you got people leave at the end of the year and stuff like that, but starting to balance out the high school classes with bringing in, experienced veteran transfers to plug holes?
Yeah, I mean, if you look, and I'm trying to remember, I keep a 2026 roster, and I want to say they've only got, I mean, obviously this is going to change, but like if you had the guys who are supposed to graduate, everybody comes back, all these recruits that you've got commits from sign, I want to say you got like 10 spots. I want to say they're at like, now that's if you stay at 85 scholarships. We know that that's kind of, it's more of a line in the sand than line in, concrete. You can go over that. I don't think they will, but I'm just saying, I really thought they'd only go around 18, 19 commits out of the high school ranks for this class. And where were we at? What did I say? We were at 22. And there's a possibility of maybe a guy or two more. I mean, I don't know. We'll see. So they've already gone a little bit over what I thought. Now there'll be attrition. I mean, we all know that. It's just the way it is. How much? No one knows. And then you could have a guy like a D'Angelo Pons or a Carter Smith. They have a great year. And maybe they go pro with eligibility remaining. So there's always that possibility. Fernando Mendoza is another guy who's been thrown as a potential draft pick who's got multiple years left. So, but I do think you're seeing them. Excuse me. I do think you're seeing them. And Cincinnati said this. He wants the basis of the program, the foundation of the program, to be guys that they bring in and develop, and then you go out. These first 2 years they had to go incredibly portal heavy because when he walked in, he's mentioned it multiple times. The entire offensive starting unit was in the portal. A bunch of defensive guys were in the portal, so they had to go out and not only get a bunch of portal guys, but they got a lot of senior portal guys. So then you had to replace all those guys this year. And I think, in time you'll see them. You're going to use the portal. You have to. I don't see any way you don't use the portal unless you're somehow lucky enough to keep everybody and you love all your players. But I do think you're going to go to the portal. But maybe instead of having a portal class of like 20, 25 guys, maybe you're at like a dozen, 14 guys, somewhere in that range. And maybe there's even years where you're a little bit less because just the way your roster lines up. But I think this class could be the first one where it's more about the high school recruiting. And then you kind of, instead of it being more about portal recruiting, you just kind of supplement. You fill in those gaps, those little holes with portal guys where you need it. I mean, not to get off topic, but like next year, they're probably going to have to go back to the portal for some receivers. They're going to lose on paper 3 or 4 guys. If Mendoza goes pro, maybe you look at the portal for a quarterback. You look at some other positions, maybe D tackle. They brought in a bunch of D linemen. Maybe you want to go get like an experienced guy, something like that. But I don't think you're going to have to go where it's just like crazy portal numbers and you're bringing in this huge portal class every year. Hopefully that's not the case. And I think that's the way he'd like it to be. And I think the 26 class, assuming they can keep it in place, is kind of the first step in, getting down that path.
And along those lines, something that I've heard kind of discussed by coaches and talent evaluators is that there's a feeling that revenue sharing is going to shrink the quality of the portal a little bit. A feeling that you might have, instead of maybe 200 quality players, that's going to drop down to maybe 150 because guys are going to be more comfortable staying in the position they're at because of the revenue sharing they're receiving. You're still going to have a heavy portal because players are always going to look for a, if there's a better opportunity out there for them to get paid more or play more, or coaching staff changes. But I do think that there's a feeling that high school recruiting might again take center stage and become more important, whereas I think in the last 4 or 5 years it hasn't felt quite as important. Matt, I'd like you to talk about the quarterback in this class. It was kind of a short game of musical chairs where it seemed like IU was in the driver's seat for one or two different guys, and then end up with Iowa decommit Cash Herrera that kind of developed really quickly before he commits from the time he decommitted from Iowa. So how did you see from the outsider's perspective, how did you see that quarterback position end up playing out? What are your thoughts on Cash Herrera, the incoming 2026 commit from California?
Yeah, I mean, it was obviously he was an Iowa commit. He was a name that was kind of came on late. And like a lot of guys, he didn't have a ton of offers. Quarterbacks commit early, and schools usually only take one. Their first choice was obviously Brody McWhorter from down in Georgia, Cass High School, good prospect. And they went hard after him, but they were also kind of keeping Luke Fahey warm. They had set up their visits to where McWhorter was going to come in, I think June 6th, and Fahey was going to come in the 13th. Well, McWhorter ended up committing before that, so they changed everything around. And I really liked Luke Fahey. I like Cash Herrera, a little bit bigger than Fahey, maybe not quite as athletic. They both can really throw the ball, so I thought both were a good fit. If this is how I look at the quarterback recruiting. If Cash Herrera, who is, what is he? We have 247 has him 32nd in the country. If you're getting a top 35 quarterback in the country and he's your third choice, you've done a good job recruiting the position. I think Chandler Whitmer's done a really good job. And these guys are all bunched together. Fahey's 31. I mean, go by rankings for what they're worth. Herrera's 32. McWhorter's 41. So at their position. So, I mean, they're all kind of bunched together. I think they're all pretty similar. It's going to come down to development, and I don't know that there's a better, group of guys developing quarterbacks in the country than Kurt Signetti. I know, Coach Sinceri's gone, but obviously, you got a good guy in Whitmer, and then Mike Shanahan's obviously involved in it too. He doesn't coach position; he's the OC. I don't know that there's a better group of guys if you're a quarterback you could go play for than what you got in Indiana. And Kurt Signetti's phenomenal what he does. I mean, he's a quarterback whisperer. There's no doubt about it. He brings in guys, and they do phenomenal in his system, and they do a great job of building an offense around what they do well. So. I think any of the three guys have been a good get, and I think Herrera is a really nice pickup. We'll see how he develops. My thing is are schools ever going to play the high school quarterbacks they sign? I'm not saying they won't, but and maybe like you said, TJ, with rev share, maybe the portal it'll shrink and there won't be as many of those guys out there. But it'd be nice. And this is nothing against Curtis Rourke or Fernando Mendoza. Rourke was fantastic. I'm excited for Mendoza, but it would be nice to see a guy you bring in. Maybe by his third year, he becomes your starting quarterback and plays really well. I'm not complaining about how they've done it, but it would be nice just to see that happen, where a quarterback comes in, he bides his time, gets better, and then as maybe a redshirt sophomore or redshirt junior, he becomes the guy and he plays really, really well. But no matter what, the quarterback position is always going to be the least of my worries with Kurt Signetti. They will figure it out, and they will get a guy who can play and play really well.
Yeah, let's talk about that quarterback class, Matt, and moving into 2027 with Jameson Purcell, who's been trending towards IU, has visited IU, has connections to IU. Seems like a really long way off, and the class of 2027 makes us all feel like a bunch of old dudes. But where does IU stand with him? And, you said quarterbacks, commit early. Is this Is this a candidate to maybe pop before the season's over?
Yeah, I think it is. I don't have a date for him. I do know that Indiana's in great shape. He's got a bunch of schools after him. I think another school that's up there on his list I've heard is Florida. But you mentioned the connections. I believe both his parents went to IU. His grandfather, who actually happens to be a member on our site, is an IU guy. And Indiana's in great shape. Everything I've heard is they're right there with him. Like I said, I'm not sure when he's going to commit. I don't think he's going to drag this out a super long time, but that's more of a gut feel than any kind of sourced info. So I don't think this is, and when I say he's close can mean, different things to different people. Close to some person might be tomorrow, and close to somebody else might be 2 or 3 weeks from now. I don't think this is going to drag out for weeks and weeks. Gun to my head, total stab in the dark. I wouldn't be surprised if it's sometime before the end of the month. And the reason why I say that is he's, like a lot of kids, he's getting close to starting his fall camp for his high school season. And my guess is if he's this close to, having the top couple schools and wanting it over with, I would think he would want it over with before he gets into practice and into his season, so he can just have it over with. So he's I think it's Park Ridge, Maine South High School, suburb of Chicago, a lefty, which is kind of interesting. But a good-looking prospect, can really throw the ball. Like I said, a ton of schools after him. Kind of communicate with him here and there. Seems like a great young man. Obviously, this isn't how he works out. It doesn't always work out this way, but it's great if you can have your first commit be a quarterback, because then you can kind of build the class around him. It doesn't mean it has to be that way, but I think it's kind of nice. And then if you're going out there and you're recruiting receivers, tight ends, offensive guys, even defensive guys, they want to know that that you got a good guy at the most important position on the field. And if they're able to reel in Jameson Purcell, then they're going to have one of the better quarterbacks in the country already locked up. I say locked up. We all know what that means verbally, but still, you got him in the fold for that 27 class. And I don't know. I'd have to go back and look, but let's just say he does commit before the end of the month or sometime early in August. I would think it's got to be about the earliest commit Indiana's ever gotten for, when you consider like going out that far to the following class. I can't remember somebody committing this early. I think there's maybe been late in the year for the, late in, let's say 23 for the 25 class or something like that. But this is pretty early. It would be pretty cool if it happens. But, like I said, he's a terrific player, and they're right there at the top for him.
All right. Good
One
stuff.
position
Go ahead.
I wanted to ask you about in this 2026 class is wide receiver. I know that they're still hoping for one addition to that position room. As is, they're looking at Walker Bryson and Cortez Rupert. Both of them bring really good speed and athletic ability to the position. Walker Bryson in particular, a guy that my understanding is he was recruited to play safety by quite a few schools. He wants to play wide receiver, and that's what IU's going to give him the chance to do. I love his highlight film. Looks like a guy that could be really dynamic with the ball. But wide receiver, do you think that there's any concern about maybe some misses in that room on some bigger guys, guys that would not necessarily be playing the slot, but would be playing more on the outside? And if so, how do you think they address that? Is that going to be strictly portal, or are they still swinging to add a guy or two?
No, I mean, obviously it's probably a little bit disappointing, but Jeff Rabjohns told me that Bill Self has always said if you hear yes more than no in recruiting, you're recruiting the wrong guys. And that's not to make an excuse. I'm just saying that it tells you that they're recruiting the right guys. They're going after, you mentioned some good guys. Obviously, the name out there is Jerquaden Guilford. I mean, the latest intel seems to point to Ohio State, which is interesting because he was going to commit, about a week and a half ago. He had a date, and it was everything was Ole Miss in the last couple of days. So my guess is Ole Miss probably threw some money at him. That's just a guess. I don't know. Ohio State's stacked at receiver, but I get it. Your Jets, Sammy, just signed Garrett Wilson to $130 million contract. Where did he play college football? Ohio State. I mean, they're putting guys in. Jeremiah Smith's going to be one of the top picks in next year's draft. I mean, it's a factory. They're really, really good. Brian Hartline is phenomenal at developing receivers. So I get it. Playing time is going to be hard to come by, but I had a former coach, and I hear people on our board, why would you go there? They got this many commits. If you're recruiting guys who are scared to go play at Ohio State or Penn State because of the competition there, how are you going to beat those schools if they come play at Indiana? If they're scared to compete for playing time at Ohio State, how are you going to beat the Ohio State if they come play for you? If they're scared to go there, so I don't buy that as I don't get into that. I see what people are saying, but as far as the misses, I think they'll be fine. I mean, I'm not trying to say, but receiver is one position where I don't want to say it's easy, but it's much easier than a lot of the other positions to get guys out of the portal. Indiana's proven that these last couple of years with what they've done out of the portal. So, and there always could be a guy that pops loose. You never know, TJ. I mean, there could be something happen in at the end of the season, a coach gets fired, a coach leaves, whatever, or a guy just isn't, thrilled with the situation that he thought was going to be better for him back in June or whatever, and he decides to, look at other options. So, they tried hard with LeVar Keys. I'm guessing that's over. But I think they'll be fine at receiver. And if these are the two guys that they bring in for the high school ranks, I'm with you. I think Walker Bryson has a chance to be a really, really dynamic slot guy and a returner on special teams. And, I think it's great that, they recruit him as a safety. Ole Adams they recruited him as a safety, and he told him, hey, I'd like to be a wideout. So they brought Shanahan in, kind of tag teamed on the recruiting, and they got him. And I think he's going to be a terrific player. But that's one of those positions. I'd be more concerned if it was a position that's a lot harder to fill, like we talked about D-line, or maybe if you weren't getting some of the O-linemen you wanted, but at receiver, I think they'll be okay.
Yeah, you talk about receivers at the lower level with the FCS and Group of Five. The talent at skill positions, at least with the first team, usually isn't that far off from a P4 team. So you look at Elijah Surratt, who was at St. Francis. Micaiah Jackson was also at St. Francis, PA, both either All-American FCS players or first-team All-Conference FCS players that you kind of kept on. And we all saw what Surratt could do at the Power 4 level last year. And we'll see what Micaiah Jackson could do this year. But there's always somebody floating around the portal that, you put them on the field and they could succeed. Any other questions for Matt, TJ?
I think as we peak towards 2027, and you mentioned Jameson Purcell, are there any other commits, not commits yet, but any other recruits, prospects that you feel kind of early ones to keep an eye on? Obviously, you said it's early for guys to be committing, but just as we kind of look towards the high school season, anybody that right now you'd say, hey, keep an eye on this guy as a prospect to watch because the staff is in a good spot with them?
I mean, nobody jumps off the top of my head. I would probably say in-state guys and guys closer, like here in this region, just because right. In-state guys, they're in-state. The program is obviously really, really made a name for itself here in the last year. And let's be honest, I mean, Indiana's getting as much talk, not only around here, but nationally, Indiana football, that is, as probably they ever have. I mean, maybe you go back to that 20 season, but it was so different because obviously nobody was at the games and it was COVID and all that. But obviously there was a lot of talk and the way Michael Penix was playing, and all that before he started getting a little bit banged up. But I would probably look at some of the in-state guys. But right now, as far as anybody who, is on my radar as someone I need to keep an eye on as making a decision here in the near future. And again, near future could be days or even a few weeks or whatever, is Jameson Purcell. But, there could be some guys, and I'm just trying to think of the in-state guys off the top of my head, that they've offered. They've offered some, but I don't get the sense that anybody's all that close. But, it's recruiting. You're dealing with, teenagers. So a kid may say one day I'm weeks away and he may commit the next. You just never know. But, yeah, I would say that he's the only one that I know of, Purcell, that they're really close on. But it wouldn't shock me if we get more into the fall and guys start coming for game day visits that you might get somebody else who pops.
How important is it that to have atmospheres like you did last year for these games? Now, it might not be in the early season. You're not going to have the same atmosphere for Kennesaw State as you do Illinois or Michigan State later in the season. But how important, and if the staff has reached out to you about it, but how important are these, sold out atmospheres, 3:30 games on CBS for these game day visits, just the perception of the program?
I think it's huge. I mean, what was the guy from Georgia, the quarterback, Julian Lewis?
Yeah.
Obviously it didn't work out with him, but I was told he was supposed to come. I can't remember what game it was. Was it Nebraska? It was one of those games where I want to say it was a Fox game, or they had one of the crews there, and he was going to come in. I think he was going to arrive right as the game started, and their plan was they were going to walk him through. The student section's now kind of there in the end zone. They were going to literally walk him through the north end zone so he could kind of hear the fans and go through the student section. So that tells you, they're using that to their advantage, or at least they were trying to. I mean, he never made the visit, obviously. We all know how it turned out. But anyways, it just shows you, that is important. I don't think that Indiana is going to be in and some of it's been because they haven't had that kind of atmosphere, but where they do a lot of official visits during the season. And one reason why is it's just really hard. I mean, I don't know I'm assuming they still do, but the team has always gone and stayed somewhere off campus the night before a home game, like, at a hotel somewhere. And so it's kind of tough. And then the coaches, their main job during the season is to win games. Like, you're trying to get recruits, but from Friday night, Saturday morning until you're trying to win a game. And I don't want to say you don't have time to deal with recruiting, but it's not your priority, and it shouldn't be. You got to win games, and obviously you want to get players, but to me, those weekends should be about trying to win games. If you can bring a guy in and you can have an official visit, great. But but with these younger kids, and this is where like the 27, the 28 guys who will be coming in for these games, these one-day visits, where they come in for game day visits, that's absolutely huge. I mean, a lot of kids I talked to, they mentioned it. The crowd, the fact that game day was there, or the Fox noon kickoff guys were there. It's a big deal. I mean, they pay attention to that stuff, and hopefully there's a lot more of those Saturdays this fall. As far as the crowds and having those national, outlets coming on campus and doing their pregame shows from right there by the stadium. So, yeah, it's a big deal. There's no doubt about it. I mean, I've been following Indiana football for a really long time. You guys have too. I don't think I've seen anything like we saw those 3 or 4 home games in a row where it was packed. It was unbelievably loud, and it was surreal, quite honestly, to see Indiana football like that.
Yeah, it was the hottest ticket in the state. You had people texting you, asking you, hey, do you know anybody who has tickets and parking passes and things like that? And, when you go on to SeatGeek or whatever other resale places, the tickets to sit, there's no real bad seats at Memorial Stadium, but to sit in the upper parts of Memorial Stadium for $250 a seat, yeah, that's unprecedented. And things like that. And it's going to help. IU Purdue is on national television and NBC on Black Friday. Now, people are going to complain about it, but it is a great stage for that rivalry, for both schools to be the only game on Friday, college game on Friday night, and things like that. Matt, you talked about winning games. I'll get off of recruiting for a second, because the second hot topic that apparently everybody cares about is IU football's non-conference scheduling. They just canceled the series with Virginia and added FCS or low G5 teams like Kennesaw State. What is your philosophy on it? This is a hill I will die on, but I wanted to hear your end on it first.
Well, my thing is, if you're going to play 9 conference games, which the Big Ten requires their schools to do, and you're playing a 12-game schedule, I have no problem with scheduling the way Indiana schedules. We've talked about this in the past. Back in the day, they scheduled a Navy. Stupid. totally stupid to schedule Navy. People say, well, it's not a P4. Well, Navy is almost like preparing for a P4 team because of how they play and how difficult it is to prepare for them. They scheduled they did the Louisville thing, which, to be quite honest, they did that for basketball. Football took it in the what for basketball, and they played that game, those games, and thankfully they got out of it. If they were at 8 conference games, I'd have no problem scheduling a Louisville, a Virginia, I don't know, name a school, Kansas, whatever you want to name, somebody out there like that. How many big, the SEC's 8 games? Every year Alabama schedules an FCS team the second or third to last week of the season. And why do they do that? Because it's basically an off week. It's an off week for their team. And I think it was smart. Saban should be commended for it. I have no problem with the scheduling. I know people are going to complain. People talk about it. Indiana's dodging. Well, the Big Ten schedule's difficult enough. And for years they were in the East, which means every year you were playing probably three of the top 10 to 12 programs in the country in Ohio State, Michigan, and Penn State. So, I understand. I understand why people are upset about it, but I don't have a problem with it. So that's kind of my take on it. I'm fine with that scheduling. But I get where people are coming from, because people don't want to pay however much ticket prices are to see Eastern. I think what they just schedule is the Eastern Illinois or Eastern Kentucky. I can't remember which one it was.
Eastern Illinois.
They just schedule. Yeah, they just schedule one of them. I get it. But I also understand the philosophy of why they're doing it.
But the goal is to get to the postseason. And we learned last year, if IU had played at Louisville and lost and went 10-2, they don't make the playoff.
Right.
So why there is no advantage outside of maybe the random fan sitting on their couch going, okay, I'd rather watch Indiana versus UVA. But nobody nationally really cares the difference between Indiana playing Kennesaw State or Austin Peay or the fighting Tony Romos from Eastern Illinois over UVA. It doesn't. None of those games move the needle for your casual college football fan. Also, you need to get to the postseason, and you get that. You want a marquee non-conference game? Go play in the TJ's Pop-Tarts Bowl against somebody, or the Mayo Bowl, and that's your marquee non-conference game. And you could get to the warm weather and things like that. The goal is to get to the postseason. The goal is to have at least 7 home games a year, and that's what they're trying to do.
Yeah, I think the more interesting thing is that 2026 still has an open slot. Currently you're looking at Colorado State on the September 5th and Western Kentucky on the 19th. There's still an open date that needs filled. So I'm interested to see what that ends up being. I'm sure it'll be somebody in the line of a Kennesaw State, a Austin Peay, an Indiana State, something like that. It's not going to be, oh wow, they were saving this big announcement. Look at that, they're playing Kansas State. No, it's going to be another bye game essentially. I think it makes a ton of sense, and for as much as people can get attached to what last season was, Indiana as a program is still in its infancy of building up to be a consistent, good program. So far, they've had a good team. Still have not established a good program. That's coming. There's no reason to believe it's not coming. But if you look at every school that has gotten, and Scott Dolson studied this, it's not hard to do, but he gets credit for studying this. You look at every school that went from a perennial doormat to a solid program, they scheduled the way that IU is scheduling in the non-conference.
Yeah, go back to Kansas State with Bill Schneider.
Wisconsin. Kansas State, Wisconsin with Barry Alvarez. You schedule to become a consistent bowl team. It still requires you to go out and win at least 3 conference games. It's not like, oh, you set up the non-conference just to make a bowl game. You still have to go win those games. You still have to go win in the Big Ten to make that bowl game. You still have to do those things. Okay, it's not a guarantee of anything, but it does play a part in setting yourself up for success to build the program to where maybe in the distant future, you can start scheduling those games. They've still got that series against Notre Dame still on the calendar for now. That's so far off in the future, who knows what the sport's going to look like. But for what they are currently slating out, I think it makes perfect sense, and it's the only way to do it if you're Indiana football, as long as the Big Ten holds you to 9 conference games. It's the only smart way to do it. So I'm glad that they're doing it that way. Matt, I know you've got a hard out. Just a last comment from you. Is there anything that you've got on your radar beyond the commitment of Cortez Redding here within the next couple of weeks for this IU class, or do you think we're done with surprises for this class as far as you can tell?
Yeah, as far as I can tell, I mean, I'm not sure where things stand with him. I mean, he's still, I think it's like the 25th, so we're still a week and a half, 10 days away. I had heard IU and NC State were best positioned, but then I saw something report on the NC State 247 site that they were hearing them, NC State, when I say them, NC State in Miami, Florida. So I'm not sure. It's one thing that's interesting about Cortez Redding. His mom and Charlton Warren, former IU, wasn't he the DC? They went to high school together, so there's a relation, like a friendship there. But I've heard that he's very high on Indiana. So I think as we get closer, we'll probably hear more. But he's one that I haven't done a lot of poking around on, just because it was so far off, and I was more worried about some of these guys who were announcing here more recently. But other than Cortez, right, I can't think of. I mean, like I said, I'm talking about Guilford. Other than that, I don't know of anybody. Now, that doesn't mean that they couldn't be working on guys who are committed elsewhere that they brought in for visits. I mean, trying to flip a guy is still a possibility for not just for Indiana, but for all schools. I mean, that hasn't changed in recruiting. So there's always the possibility that a guy that's committed elsewhere could be a potential flip down the road for IU, and then they could have a guy that's a potential flip to somewhere else. But I don't think they're done recruiting high school guys for the 26 class, but I think they're probably done recruiting people who aren't already on the radar. It would be guys that they already brought in for visits. They have a really good relationship with. Now, like I said, if somebody pops free, or somebody, there's something happens at a school and a guy's out there, then maybe you try to get involved. But I mean, I think they're pretty much focused on the guys that they went after, brought in for visits, maybe either once or multiple times, that are either uncommitted or could be committed elsewhere, and they try to see if they can change their mind.
Matt, as always, thank you for joining us. You can find Matt Weaver and all the work he does on Peegs.com. Matt, thanks for jumping on. Hopefully you're not playing outdoor baseball today, since it is now raining in Indianapolis. If so, good luck. Bring an umbrella.
Thanks, guys. I appreciate it. Take care.
All right, that's Matt Weaver from Peegs.com. TJ, any final thoughts before we sign off?
No, again, we just want to invite people to HoosierHuddle.com. It's a new look, and it is going to, evolve as we get used to things. And we're really excited, though. We're really excited for this upcoming football season, not just for what's going to happen on the field, but we're looking forward to covering a season with football forums, with interactive chats that we're going to be doing, with these podcasts, answering questions, having conversations with our members on the site. We are really looking forward to that. It's going to be a lot of fun. We're going to do it for football. We're going to do it for basketball. We think it's a really good deal that we got going on right now. So we're pumped up. We hope you join us. We think we've got a good community brewing over there. We're going to continue working as hard as we can to make it a fun place to hang out.
Yeah. Come to HoosierHuddle.com. We're running our summer special right now. That includes, as you see the graphic on YouTube, exclusive podcasts. We'll be starting our Hoosier Historia series with Andy Graham, looking back at some of the great moments in IU, both football and basketball history and sports history, as well. Recruiting scoops, access to our Hoosier Huddle staff and much more, including a fantasy college football league that should be launched here in the next week or so. It's
That's right.
$15, gets you a full year. That deal ends at kickoff. Once the IU football season kicks off, that goes up to $30. You could give us a try for $3 a month as well. Anyway, HoosierHuddle.com. You can follow us on Twitter as well at Hoosier_Huddle. And, come try us out, leave some comments. We'll try and make the best community out there for everybody. That does it for our podcast. We'll be back to talk football and basketball later this summer. We got Big Ten Media Days coming up next week as well.
That's right. Yeah, we got 6 Saturdays left. Is that right? 6 or 7, something like that. Until
about 6.5. Last week was 7. Last Saturday was 7.
Okay.
This Saturday will be 6. So we're right in the midweek at Tuesday. So thanks for listening. Subscribe on YouTube.
And stay tuned. We're going to be ramping up podcasts all over the place here.
Yep. And tell your friends.